So today I thought I'd talk about 3 underrated agents in my opinion in Valorant right now, and we need to quickly kind of go over, of course, what underrated means, because of course you could be the best agent in the game and everyone agree, but still be underrated, because actually it turns out you're the most broken thing that's ever existed in the game, and even if everyone agrees that you're the best, that still might be underrated. A good example of this might be Astra. Remember old Astra before she got nerfs? Everyone was kind of like, this agent is insane and definitely needs nerfing. But even now, after those nerfs, we've again got to the point where everyone talks about Astra like, oh, Astra needs a nerf again. So probably back then when initial Astra came out, she was probably underrated and we didn't fully realize just how broken the initial Astra was. And so, that needs to come into consideration as well, that any agent can be underrated. It doesn't matter how strong or weak you are, it can be any agent. And I've seen some posts about this on Reddit. That's kind of what inspired this. And so I'm going to take into consideration, like, pro metas, generally what you see in pro metas, and also what I think is kind of the community perception at large as well. And the first agent we are going to talk about is Brimstone. And Brimstone, I don't think is nearly as far away as I think some other people do, or I see people talking about Brimstone as if he is, completely terrible and useless in a lot of situations. And don't get me wrong, on certain maps, Brim is not a great choice, but on other maps, I think that Brim is a very good choice and a very solid option indeed. And let me explain to you why that is. Well, we've seen teams like Gambit, teams like Ascend, the literal 2 best teams in the world running Brimstone. I mean, Ascend always run Brimstone on Bind, and they never lose on Bind. So, maybe there is something to that. And why is that the case? Well, of course, when we look at Brim's kit, sure, his Stim Beacon probably isn't going to give you that much value. And I agree that, the Stim Beacon isn't great. But his other 3 abilities actually work very well for this map. Obviously, the Incendiary Grenade, it speaks for itself, and the ult as well is a very powerful ult and speaks for itself. And on tight, close maps like this, like Bind, if you can ult all of this like this, that's a really strong, and you can use that to just run on site as well. So, Brim has a lot of good things going on this map just from some of his abilities already. But then obviously the one thing that everyone talks about is his smokes aren't as good as Astra. Why would you ever use Brim smokes instead of Astra smokes? So let's compare the two, shall we? Because Bind as a map is a map that has very slow rotations. Let's say we're attacking this A site. Of course, because there is no mid, it's going to take people a long time to run all the way from B to A, no matter whether they go through the flank or they go through their own spawn. Obviously, they could go through the teleport, and that is kind of the point, right? But obviously, that becomes very obvious then. So there is no discrete, quick way of rotating on this map, aside from maybe, some ability uses like chambers. But again, that's pretty bait as well, to be honest, because there's only, one area that you can put these chamber TPs in and make it work. So that also, has some disadvantages to it as well. So with that in mind, what that means is that if the rotations are slow, if you can really force your way onto a site and, execute onto a site, then you're going to be doing pretty well. The thing is, Astra, of course, has to play in like a safe spot and smoke, from her astral plane and kind of do it as the team is like running in, and she'll often be in this and like, doing it as the team is starting to execute. And it's quite difficult to be Astra and thinking about all the other things as well, because you'll want to like stun back site, you might want to send in a suck into a certain location as well, and that's very difficult to do on the fly. Even the pros, aren't running in with Astra alongside their teammates and doing all that, because it just takes too much coordination, it takes too much thought to be able to aim and do that and look at the stars and do it all. Whereas Brim, Brim gets the advantage of being able to very easily, it's much easier for Brim in general to just, quickly smoke off 3 smokes down like that, send a molly in as well, potentially to a whatever place you want, at whatever corner you want, and then just go with the team, right? And on a map where there is that slow rotation, that's what favors Brim, and we've seen it on maps like Bind, as I say, with Ascend. We've seen Gambit run it on Fracture as well, which does a similar thing. And so Brim, I think, has quite a few upsides. Yes, I do think that Brim still needs a bit of a buff, but the way I see people talking about Brim, I do think he is underrated and not nearly as bad as you might think. Next up is my boy Cypher, and Cypher, I have seen a lot of people talking about Cypher as if he is just truly awful, and I've seen a lot of people say, since Chamber has come into the game, why would anyone ever pick Cypher? But the thing is, in the pro scene at least, you do still see people picking Cypher, and so let me explain to you why people still pick Cypher at the pro level, and why Cypher is really not that bad at all. I know a lot of people talk about his ult, not really getting anything, which isn't quite true either. Like, I admit that sometimes the ult can be a bit clunky and not really give you that much overall, and it requires someone to be dead and all of that. I agree that that can be a bit clunky, and maybe they will, look at that and make it a bit easier for Cypher. But in general, Cypher is pretty good, and let me explain. So, on a map like Haven, which is where, I just watched Sentinels play on Haven, and they were running Cypher. So why did they run Cypher on this map? Well, the reason is that Haven obviously has a lot of areas to go to, and there's a lot of, there's 5 different pathways for the attackers to choose, and, well, the first thing, of course, is that Cypher gives you 3 different the information tools, you could say, as opposed to the 2 of, a chamber or a killjoy. That's the first thing. You just get 1 extra, right? And one of them is a pretty active one as well on the camera. It's not just passive information, it's active information, right? You can see exactly where someone is, you can tell someone exactly where someone is going, and a well-placed camera, could potentially win you around in some instances, particularly at the pro level where information is so important. But then secondly, and I think this is very underrated indeed, one thing that people just don't think about for Cypher, and I think it's because they don't particularly understand this potential ability of Cypher, is his cages can be really, really crucial and really work pretty well for things like Haven on this A side here. The reason for that is if you can't cross here, if you can't get control over the lobby here in A, well, then someone could just sit, if I can get off Sky here, someone could just sit over here and just, ping you through it. And if they've got a good shot or they've got an operator or something like that, if you can't cross across there, well, then, you're in trouble. If you can't get out of this little gap and opening, if they're just constantly killing you from that angle, well, then you can never really go A, right? You can never even explore towards A. But this cage allows you to do a lot of things. It allows you to cross. It allows you to have faked a cross. If someone's sitting here, won't know have they crossed or not. And this is a very common angle for pretty much, that you see in ranked games, you see in pro games all the time. This is a very common angle for people to take up, so they won't know if they've crossed. It also allows you to sneak into here, or potentially out of here. You change this choke point to be a potential surprise for this person, and potentially get that kill with another bit of good utility. We often see this Cypher cage used, and then, a flash out from a Sky or something like that will come out here, and then the team will explode out and try and, find this person and get that free kill once they're flashed. Those are important things, and this is why a Cypher can be really important on a map like this, because Chamber isn't giving you that. You don't get this, and you don't want to waste a smoke on this. You don't want to use something, as important as such a full smoke on something like this. It's not, that valuable to do that. But a Cypher cage works really, really well for something like this. And we also see it on a map like Split as well. We often see something like this, and again, Cypher cage here potentially, because again, this is exactly the same thing where if you can't cross this, if you can't get past this area, you have no way, no easy way of getting onto the A site. So getting some early control of this space here with something like a Cypher cage and cutting off, at least one of the angles. Sometimes we even see it with both angles with Cypher, where there'll be a cage here as well, just to give you full control of this area and be able to exist in this space, which then gives you the ability to potentially actually attack this A site, because if you can't get past this, well, then you're not attacking the A site. And so this again is a really good use of Cypher cages, and you'll see it in pro games all the time. And this is why Cypher on certain maps like this, where if you can't attack a certain site without getting past a certain dangerous area, this is why Cypher is good, because you don't want to waste that full smoke on it, but Cypher cage is perfect for just walking through and getting into this area and getting some control over a key area of the map. And then the final agent I want to talk about is KO. Now, you might be wondering, KO isn't quite like those other 2 agents. I think in the pro scene, definitely we are seeing KO more and more, and you might think, well, KO isn't really underrated, he's pretty good. But as I mentioned at the start, you can be underrated even if people think you are good. And I think we are beginning to see this more and more. In the last, week of the VCT qualifiers, we saw Gambit run KO on Icebox, something that I'd never seen, and we saw Fnatic run KO on Split, something that is also pretty rare to see. And we saw both of those teams do pretty well with this agent on those maps. And the reason is KO is really, really good. Now, KO has a weird design where at higher levels, KO is more important, because if you're playing against lower level players that don't know how to use their utility, suppressing them isn't going to give you that much of an advantage. But if you can suppress a pro player who's potentially relying on that utility, then KO is really good. And KO, particularly with the addition of Chamber as well, is a really good counter to agents like Jett and Chamber, who might play really risky angles with the knowledge that they can get out, but then once they're suppressed, they can't get out. And all of a sudden, they're just in a bad spot. They're just in a spot that you would never play with an agent that can't get out. And that's why KO is so good, because Jett is so good, and Chamber is pretty good as well, and we see agents like Reyna on maps like Icebox as well. So it makes a lot of sense to me to play something like KO, because if you can suppress them, they just end up in a bad spot, and they're just gonna, very worst, get traded. And that's the difference, right? The idea of these agents and playing these agents on this map is to, play aggressive, get a kill, get out, live. You're in a 5v4. Congratulations, the round is probably going to be yours at the pro level. But not with KO. KO says no. You're going to end up in, best case scenario, a 4v4, if not a 5v4 in our favor, because now you're suppressed and you're going to be in a bad spot, and you're probably going to be panicking that you can't get out all of a sudden, and maybe need to, run away or give away your position very obviously, and, you haven't played as optimally as you could have done had you not been suppressed. Not only that, but we have also seen the KO flash, the KO little flash drive here, the right-click flash drive that he just pops up out of his hand. Insanely strong. It seems to be the only flash that pros sort of regularly can't look away from, like regularly can't kind of dissect or know that it's coming. When it comes to sky flashes and breach flashes, you'll often see that pros, can look away from it, get away from it. But when it comes to KO flashes, they seem to get caught by it a lot more. And I don't know whether it's just the timing of it or whatever it actually is, but for whatever reason, it's catching them out a lot more. It's probably just like the short duration, the short delay of being able to do it from, particularly if you're in a smoke, just being able to do it at any point and just, flash out and straight away it hits them. If you time it well with KO and you get that timing down for when it will flash, you can, just have it peek out of the smoke just as it flashes, if you can, kind of time that right. And it just has created a lot of chaos. And so for that reason, I wouldn't be shocked as we go through, the weeks of this VCT. I would not be shocked to see just more and more and more KO, to the point where people start asking. I wouldn't be shocked if by the end of it, the people are asking, hey, KO, does KO need a nerf? I wouldn't be shocked if some pros were like, this KO character, we might need to add on to the maybe change this character list. And that's going to be interesting to see going forward, no doubt. But I definitely do think that KO is going to keep rising. The KO stonks keep rising. Maybe not for every single map, right? If there isn't some good ways of, using the 0 point here, if there isn't as many good positions to use the 0 point, then sure, maybe we won't see as much KO on those maps. But I think on maps like Ascent, KO has already become meta, and I think anything that doesn't pick KO on that map is kind of hard trolling, to be honest, because I think he's really, really strong on that map. And now we're starting to see, as I mentioned, on some of these other maps as well, where you would normally never see KO, like a Split, like an Icebox as well. And so I think that KO is coming in pretty big all of a sudden, and I think more and more pro teams are starting to realize that this agent is actually very strong.